Okay, good evening, everybody. This is Dr. Agoro, and today we're going to be talking about the environmental literacy theory. The environmental literacy theory, and you know, I'm sure we are still familiar with some of the concepts that we spoke about in the previous classes, and you know, when we spoke about pollution, diversity, climate change and the like. Without further ado, today we are going to be talking about some of those theories that help to explain, you know, environmental education. And one of them, one of the very most basic ones, is the environmental literacy theory. You know, environmental literacy theory. We, when you know what it means for literacy, environmental literacy, we're talking about knowledge of the environment. Because whether we like it or not, when we have problems with our environment, it is not a problem of technology or a problem of, it's actually usually a human problem. One human being, one somewhere is the one, we are the ones actually, not living right in, in the environment. Okay, so let's move. The overview of this lecture is introduction to environmental literacy, historical development, how it started, key components of environmental literacy. The theory itself explains the importance of education and society, and the strategies for promoting environmental literacy. And then there's of course a conclusion. Okay, so introduction to environmental literacy. Environmental literacy refers to the knowledge and understanding of environmental concepts. It includes awareness of the environmental issues, and the skills that are required to address them. Um, of course, it encourages responsible environmental behavior, and it is important for sustainable development. That was one thing I remember that we discussed you uh, in some of the previous classes. So, generally speaking, this theory proposes that individuals must develop a combination of environmental knowledge, practical skills, and then develop, positive environmental attitudes and responsible behaviors to address, you know, to address environmental problems. That is where, when you are able to address environmental problems, that's when development can be sustainable. It is when you have knowledge, of the concepts of climate change, of what causes it, how the different players in the chain of events work. That is when you can then begin to develop skills to address these problems. Anyway, generally speaking, that is what the environmental literacy theory is all about. It is all about knowledge, knowing some of the concepts that we have been discussing in environmental education, concepts such as biodiversity, diversity, uh, keeping the balance in the environment, um, climate change as a result of some of the activities of man, like deforestation, the depletion of the ozone layer because we are burning fuels that destroy that, and so on and so forth. And so it is when you have knowledge of these things that then you can now determine what type of skills are required to address them. You know, and the theory also talks about encouraging responsible environmental behavior in our little spaces wherever we are. And of course, it is only when we have developed this type of responsible behavior, that is when we begin to think of how a particular item, the waste from a particular process or item is going to be disposed of, and if it is good for the environment. That way, we begin to encourage the we encourage even manufacturers to manufacture things in such a way that the they are made with products that are pro environment and not just products that will be disposed of in a way eventually that will further harm the environment. Okay, so how did this theory and this movement, this idea that is important to know about and have knowledge about the environment start? It emerged in the 1970s with the global environmental movement. It was influenced by different environmental education initiatives. There were conferences, international conferences, where this, environmental awareness and some of the key concepts in environmental education were discussed. And it became a key concept in sustainability education. Anytime you want to talk about any sustainability, the environment will come in because in the environment we must live. We must live. So so environmental literacy theory simply explains how individuals develop the knowledge I've spoken about before, attitudes and behaviors towards the environment. It focuses on education as a pathway to environmental responsibility. That is, if you are able to teach people to understand the concepts of education of the environment of environmental education, such as biodiversity, climate change, and the rest of it, then it is the way that is the beginning, because when you have an understanding of these concepts is when you can begin to be behaving in an environmentally responsible way, and it encourages informed decision making about environmental issues. The next slide. What are the core components of this environmental literacy? What are the core components? The core components include knowledge, awareness, attitude, skills, and responsible behavior. Of course, I've repeated it over and over again. Environmental knowledge, knowledge about the concepts of the environment and what are those concepts? Pollution, unsustainable resource consumption, biodiversity loss, climate change, and so on and so forth. Those are some of the issues. So we need knowledge of all these things. We need to be aware of how these things affect human life and human existence. Then we need to develop attitudes, positive attitudes, the attitude that indicates that look, we need to ensure that we continue to protect the environment in such a way that it can sustain us. And then we need to begin to train and develop skills. So how do you recycle? How do you dispose of your waste? How should we sort the waste? What type of energy saving appliances do we purchase? What type of emissions do our vehicles, our appliances, what type of emissions do they have? And it is when you now start to put those type of things into consideration before you make purchases and all that. That is when you can say that you are behaving in an environmentally responsible way. So, what is environmental knowledge? Like I said, understanding ecosystems and natural processes, knowledge of environmental problems such as pollution and climate change, awareness of human impacts on nature. So, those are the things that comprise of the type of knowledge we're talking about when we say that the first part of the aspect of the literacy theory is the knowledge. What are the things that you're supposed to know? You are supposed to know about the ecosystem, that is, how the different um, animal species, insects, uh, water, man, land, the plants, and how they support and protect each other. There's knowledge of environmental problems such as pollution. What are the things that pollute the environment? What are pollutants? How do they do it? Do they seep into the soil little by little over time? How should we dispose of our waste? How many? Some of these things we discussed in class about how we have houses and the generator for every room outside. There's the noise pollution. There is the air pollution and the different types of pollution that you know we that we talked about. Of course, on that day we talked about urban congestion being one of the causes, transportation systems also contributing its part, industrial activities also being part of some of those things that cause serious pollution. So, understanding those type of things, uh, you know, and of course, if you remember on that day we talked about water pollution, land pollution, soil pollution, and the like. Uh, Knowledge of all these things will give us. I mean, if you have knowledge of all this, you also have knowledge of climate change, and we now need to know. We need to be aware of the human impact on nature. That most of this, but not most, all the things that we're talking about, all these forms of pollution and all these things are all human made. They are all what human made. But generally speaking, the type of knowledge that we require that we're talking about here is uh, environmental knowledge would include knowledge about climate change, about pollution, air pollution, water pollution, the loss of biodiversity, and generally speaking, the awareness of human impact on nature. Environmental awareness is the recognition of environmental issues locally and globally. Being aware of, I mean, what are the issues? And if you remember again, we discussed about some of those issues, flooding, you know, of increased rains to the point where, by the time everything is linked together, the rains, the block drainages, the lack of, and the fact that urban congestion, flooding is, I mean, so how do you need to be aware and recognize these issues as they are happening locally and globally. Under environmental awareness, we also have understanding the importance of protecting natural resources and sensitivity to environmental problems. Of course, we discussed. I told you about leave it better than you leave it the way you met it. That is when you go for camping and you go into natural environments. The need for you to strive to ensure that you do not distort nature in its form. You leave it as you met it, as to the best of your ability. Being aware of the environment, being aware that you you may be distorting the ecosystem and that you need to try to conform so that you don't distort it or affect it in such a way that we begin to lose some of our bio life. You don't chase the fishes out of the water from a higher point to a lower point. You don't, you know, that's what's happening anyway. Generally speaking, when as we encroach into virgin lands, we are pushing all the animals and the wildlife into smaller spaces. And sometimes animals are really on a normal day shouldn't be in the same environment, get into the same environment, and then that usually has a sort of like domino effect on, a domino effect, and then eventually we may begin to see the loss of some of these animals because maybe they have now entered the space of another animal that will eat all of them at once. Whereas under normal circumstances, if everybody was allowed to stay where they're supposed to stay, the tiny rat will never get into the area where the fat cat is living. That kind of thing. Environmental attitudes, of course, development of positive feelings towards environmental protection, willingness to support sustainable practices and appreciation of nature and balance. These are very important attitudes that need to be developed if we are to protect our environment. Um, you know, because sometimes the pool, on the other hand, is economics. Some of these, sustainable practices would require more time. For instance, a sustainable practice is tree planting, but you know how long it takes for trees to plant. And I guess many of us are a bit impatient, but we need to develop those attitudes that encourage. you know, tree planting, that discourage the this indiscriminate cutting of, trees when they're not necessary. You can trim some of these things and they're not hurting anybody, but they're actually, improving our quality of life or keeping our quality of life up there, as opposed to just cutting them off. Environmental skills. This is the environmental skills would include the ability to analyze environmental problems. It will include critical thinking and problem solving skills, ability to participate in um, environmental decision making. You know, environmental decision making. Those are very important skills that are required, that are part of the things that are this that the literacy, environmental literacy theory talks about. Um, Environmental skills. Okay, let's look at these environmental skills again. What are these environmental skills that we're talking about? So, environmental skills would include cognitive skills like critical thinking, systems analysis, problem solving, risk assessment, and data interpretation. Those are some of the skills that we would need to, solve environmental problems. You need to be able to assess risks. You need to be able to, interpret data. There are also some practical skills that, are also covered under these environmental skills. And this will be waste sorting and management skills. There are energy conservation practices. There are environmental monitoring skills, and so on and so forth. Environmentally responsible behavior. What would we consider as to be proper environmentally responsible behavior? Environmentally responsible behavior. Actions that help to protect the environment. Recycling, they will include recycling, conservation, and sustainable living, and participation in environmental protection activities. What other types of behavior do you think are going to, will be considered as environmental responsible behavior? Reducing consumption is one of them. Of course, but here what we mean is that reducing the consumption of things that are produced in a way that harm the environment, or whose waste products harm the environment. Recycling and waste sorting. That was one of the things that we discussed in the last class. When waste is sorted, it makes the waste disposal process very easy, and it also makes it possible to you know use different methods for the different types of materials that are in our waste. Because if your organic waste is all together in the same place, then it's easy to dispose of it in a way that actually supports the environment. And these are conservation methods. These are sustainable ways of supporting the environment. So energy conservation, of course, that is you purchase appliances and all that. That energy saving and friendly, environmental friendly. Uh, you know, Appliances. That is what we call environmentally responsible behavior. Um, of course, participation in environmental protection activities will be one of those things that will be considered, responsible behavior. Environmentally responsible behavior. What is the role of environmental literacy in education? It integrates environmental issues into school curricula. That is, you will now be able to, because it is always important. I continue to say this. It's extremely important to have our young children learn about the environment from that age, because the when certain habits have already formed, certain poor attitudes have already been formed, usually extremely difficult to get people to change their behavior, except after sometimes, unfortunately, sometimes terrible experiences. But of course, it is the role of environmental literacy in education is that it helps to integrate this environmental into everyday life, into school curriculum, into the what students actually are going to be taught. It encourages active learning and outdoor education. That is, teaching about the environment. Of course, we have defined the environment as everything around us, and so it it encourages us to go outdoors to learn about what are the things that are around us. It helps students develop critical thinking about environmental problems. In fact, there are some very interesting problem solving lessons that can be developed to address environmental issues, and the children will be the ones to think about the problem, look at the problem, think about the problem themselves, and provide solutions. Provide solutions, and those type of experiences are usually they usually stay with the children in such a way that it helps to form their attitudes later on in life. Oh, this is a bit of let me see. Let me see. Um, Will there be teaching strategies for environmental literacy? Okay, so again, I just said this, but let's just go over it. What are the types of teaching strategies for environmental literacy? Project-based learning. That was one of what I where you give them a project of an environmental problem, and you know guide them with some of the principles, and then see how they, as a group, sometimes solve the problem with their knowledge of the environment. And, you can use field trips and outdoor experiences. I don't know if I mentioned it in one of my classes. We do have a course in human kinetics and health education, usually taken during the second year, and we go to the citizenship and leadership training center in Apapa. And during that period, the students are exposed to the natural environment. The, things have become a bit more difficult now than they were in the past. When we used to go to Takwa Bay on an endurance trek, you know, uh, and then go to the beach. And we used to sleep over at the beach before coming back the next day. Um, but we don't do that anymore for security reasons. But still, we go out there, we have fun. We Some of the principles that we've taught in class, we ensure that those principles are we continue to guide our activities as we go. We clean up after ourselves immediately we're done. We don't leave any plastics behind. We do all those. So those type of experiences, we look at how we dispose of our waste and all that to conform, so that we always with our mantra, keep the environment the way you leave it the way you met it, guiding us. So we also have community environmental projects and interdisciplinary teaching approaches. So those are some of the different ways of strategies for literacy, environmental literacy, teaching about the environment. What are some of the challenges that we face in environmental literacy? One is limited environmental education resources. Even though, well, like mm, we said earlier on, some of the earliest, movements for the protection of the environment started in the 1970s. That's pretty late. However, in the period, quite a good number of resources have been, produced, but they are still limited. And as we continue to, um, discover new issues, new problems that are raising, we will continue. I'm sure there will be more and more resources to use for some of the the problems we're facing now. There are lack of trained educators. Thank God you guys are in this class. Uh, all educators, I believe, and so the that is being addressed. There's low public awareness in some communities. That's very true. And then there are policy and institutional limitations. That is also very true. You see, uh, especially in Nigeria, we have a lot of good policies, do environmental sanitation or so and so day. That. But how do we the waste that are generated? Have you ever passed near any of these our PSP type of trucks that move waste? If you happen to be there for more than a few minutes, the type of environmental pollution in terms of pollution from those vehicles is something else. Apart from the fact that they usually park on the road in a hazardous manner, and and some of the roads where they are picking up the dirty, I don't think those are roads where refuse dumps should be. But well, uh, those are policy and institutional limitations that still affect us negatively in these parts of the world. What are the benefits of environmental literacy? Of course, informed and responsible citizens. You will teach your child the way it should go. You will have a responsible, informed and responsible citizen. Well, maybe you should have, because sometimes having information and having all the information and this thing doesn't mean that the person will make the proper decision. But at least out of 100, by the time you have informed and everybody knows exactly what they're supposed to do, what we expect that the vast majority will turn out to be responsible citizens. This will give us improved environmental decision making. Of course, when people are informed about the problems, they know the concepts, they know the problems, they have problem solving skills, they have analyzed the problem, they have the skills to then the decision making about environmental issues will be improved. That goes with sustainable lifestyles. Of course, naturally, if people are knowledgeable about the environment, they will be able to pick and choose from the different types of lifestyles that are available, the much more beneficial one to the environment, that is, which will be much more sustainable, in the long run. Stronger environmental stewardship. That is, we will take care of our environment better. The way we take care of our environment will just be better. The more educated people about environmental issues we have, the better we will be able to handle our environment. Case examples of environmental literacy. So what are these type of different literacy programs that you can, institute in your schools? We have the school recycling programs, have community tree planting initiatives, environmental clubs in schools, conservation education programs. So all these things are things that you use to spread the news. You know, plan a community tree planting initiative or do something. Maybe before the end of this class, maybe we will take in suggestions of one or two things we can do, maybe in this environment, or maybe we can, you know, look for anybody who has flowers or something that we can bring into the environment that we just create some awareness in a nearby secondary school or a primary school about the environment and the advantages of conservation and education programs. So, in conclusion, environmental literacy is essential because ignorance is, I mean, I don't even know what type of quotes to put in respect of ignorance. It is when you are ignorant, the way to the solution does not exist yet. So, but when you are knowledgeable about something, then you know that at least part of the problem is solved. So, environmental literacy is essential for addressing environmental challenges. Education plays a key role in building environmentally aware and environmental awareness and responsibility. It is also important. I mean, environmental literacy is important. In promoting environmental literacy contributes to sustainable development. Discussion questions. Yes, you can. I'm sure you are going to have access to this slide, so you can look at these questions and play with them. What strategies can improve environmental awareness among students? That was where we just talked about the tree planting and some of the field trip excursions and stuff like that. How can your communities encourage? Anyway, those are for you. Thank you very much for your attention. Uh, yes, I think you should be able to write your questions or comments in the. Anyway, I will see how that works out, but I think you should be able to put your questions in the comments section. But at some point, we will still have some, classes, and I hope that we see them. So you can jot your questions down, and then when we meet, you can, we will talk about those questions and maybe discuss one or two of them. Uh, that will be the end of this class. Thank you very much for listening, and do have a lovely afternoon.